Hello, this is Nick Pellegrino, and welcome to LIghtwave 3D 9 and View 8 and also 7 integration. I say also version 7 because a lot of what I'm covering and the features of 8 were introduced within and starting with the plugin at version 7. So most of what I'll be showing within version 8 will also apply to version 7 users. After installing xStream and opening LIghtwave for the first time, you will notice within your plugins, now it probably won't show up in mine because I already have everything loaded in, but actually we can see the command list under the additional plugins. I also want to note that I am using if we go to up at the top, Edit, Menu Layout, under presets, I'm using the Studio Production style. So under the Users tab, we have Additional, and we can see all of the xStream commands. So if you haven't imported the branch for the menus, this is what you're going to see and all that's going to be available to access the commands. Now I do want to note that as of version 7, even if you are running version 8, it will still say View 7, and that's for compatibility reasons, which we'll take a look at in a little bit. So what we need to do is install the menus correctly. I already have mine set up and customized a little, but in order to do that, you go to Edit Menu Layout. What you can do is go to the main menu. You can right-click and import branch. And what you'll find is the View 8 xStream menus config file, or 7 xStream if you're using version 7, and this is located in the installation directory. So the View 8 xStream installation, not the content folder, but the actual installation where the program exists, under Environment, xStream, LIghtwave 9, and then you'll find the configuration file. So once you select to open that and load it in, it'll add in a new tab. Depending on where you were clicked when you imported the branch, it might show up within the other items. You might just need to drag it around. Now I've gone ahead and customized mine just a little bit, pulled out some different options. More commonly used commands. Another thing that's really useful to do is to make the entire xStream command list available within the mouse menus. So we have a left mouse button menu, middle mouse, and also right mouse button. I've got mine set up for the left mouse button, and all you need to do is import the branch once again into one of those groups. So now I can access all of the commands through the mouse menus. So in order to pull up the mouse menus, if you're not familiar with that, it's Control-Shift and then the different buttons on the mouse. There's one for the left mouse button, the middle mouse, and then the right mouse. So you can set that up really wherever it's going to be most useful for you. I've also gone ahead and edited this to pull out some very commonly used commands. Edit object material, change object material, edit object, properties, the material summary, the overall options for the program, atmosphere editor, render options, and the command materials does not appear to really do anything. I think that might be a menu for the material summary. So you can just ignore that. It does make it a lot easier to access everything. And after loading in your menus and setting everything appropriately, assigning any keyboard shortcuts you might have, it's a very good idea to close the program out. Closing the program ensures that everything is saved, so in case LIghtwave crashes, you don't lose any customization. Now another really important thing to set up before launching xStream as the plugin within LIGhtwave is to open up the standalone version and manage some settings. So going to File and Options, there's a couple of things that should really be set to avoid crashes, incompatibilities. The first option is the display. Now, as of version 8.4, whenever you open the plugin, the integrated plugin within the host application being LIGhtwave in this case, it does revert to the fixed hardware pipeline, which is the older shader model. And if your video board is compatible with Shader 4, that is the much better method and looks a lot better when you're working in the standalone. The only problem is it just keeps resetting itself back and forth, so that is slightly a pain. You just want to make sure that everything is going to be compatible. You want to set your max usable video memory. I've got mine set a little lower than is actually available. And I've done this to ensure that Vue isn't using all of my video memory, and that way LIGhtwave can still use some of the available memory without there being any hang-ups. It's not always a problem, but sometimes it's a good idea just to limit it a little. Mine's divided in half right now. Okay, another thing I like to do is turn off the limit OpenGL polygons. Now, some of these settings are really going to impact just the standalone, but you will notice increased performance. At least I normally do. Most of the people will notice less crashes. Another thing is to turn off the maintain instant draw frame rate, and then turn off the degraded modes. Most video cards can handle just about anything you can throw at them these days. Vue's optimized really well for the most part, so you really don't need to have these options on. I hardly ever use all of my resources, even with several billion polygons up to 1 trillion polygons in a scene, because most of it's just instance and just showing different billboard previews. So the next couple of options under General Preferences is to disable automatic material preview rendering and only material previews, or only render material previews in the active editor. This is really important to prevent certain OpenGL crashes that can happen. And the reason for this is the proxy panels are still running under the Vue OpenGL settings. So if you're working in, let's say, the function editor within Vue while running the xStream plugin, it is going to be relying on these settings. I'm going to turn off the interactive numeric field changes, and it's a good idea. By default, the undo operation is set to 5. With the way Vue is set up, most undo operations really don't need to go back that far, so you can keep it pretty low. And this also prevents large ecosystems and lots of data like that from being stored in the memory. I'm going to turn off the generate resume render info. And then I'm also going to go over to the display options. And a couple things I want to know. I do have the show wireframe on selected objects and highlight parts using current material checked off. I've noticed with the wireframe overlays and the shading color overlays on objects, it will sometimes decrease performance, especially with terrains. Those settings typically only apply to the standalone version, but because the standalone is and Vue is basically running while the plugin is going within the integrated version, it's a good idea to just make sure that some of these options are off. If you're going to be working in the standalone, there is the option to load interface presets. So you can choose LIghtwave from the list or another program in order to basically just change the keyboard shortcuts and sometimes the color of the application. Other than that, it doesn't rearrange any panels or anything because that cannot be customized. So once that's set up, you can click OK and close it out. There's a couple of other things. If you want to set up some default settings within the standalone, you can set the default scene, and that way every time you open View it's going to create the exact same scene at startup. You can also choose to bypass the visual browser for scenes and pictures. And now what that is if I go to File, Open, this is the file browser and the View file browser. So if you don't want to use this, and you just want to use your normal OS file picker, you can ignore it. Same thing with loading images. Can sometimes be a lot easier. And there's one last setting I want to show you. So go to File, Options, and under Units and Coordinates, we have the unit setting that cannot be set within the integrated version. This needs to be set within the standalone. But it does greatly impact the way View works. Now, the default is 1 meter, so 1 view unit is equal to 1 meter. And this is the default as of version 8. In version 7, the original default was 0.1 meters, and some things are a little more compatible, easier to work with at a value of 0.1. But because of the new default and everything's kind of being programmed to the new 1 meter, we're going to stick with 1 meter. And there's a lot of things that can change because of that. We'll see that a little bit later as we make some changes to the internal unit. Actually, it did used to be called the internal unit, so if you're using View 7, it is the internal unit. And now it just says 1 view unit is 1 meter. If you change it within a current scene that's already open, has a different unit, and you want to apply the new settings to the current scene, which will resize all materials as well, and change the actual coordinate size. If you want to change the coordinate system for y-axis up or z-axis up, you can do that here, although not everything in the program gets changed when you set it to the y-axis up, and really changes the basic modifications for position and scaling, rotation, but it's not necessarily going to change the way the function editor works and the way designing certain materials are. I'm going to keep it at the default, which is z-axis up. So it's a little bit different than the way it is in LIghtwave, but that's okay. I also want to note, if your display settings for your video card are not compatible, View will let you know, which is another reason why it's very important to open the standalone version before really using it within the integration host application to prevent any crashes or compatibility issues. So once that's set up, we can go ahead. And now my default scene is a little bit different than the standard default scene. And this will be saved out. You will be able to load this in with the content that is provided with the training. So that way you can use the same scene I have. I've got some different settings for the atmosphere. And also just kind of a grass material on the ground plane.